Hello and welcome to the Price Oracle demo video. I'm Hannah with Lightning Labs, and in this video we're going to walk through and demonstrate how to set up a Price Oracle for a Taproot Assets Edge Node. So in this video, what we'll do, and we're going to cover a lot of things, and I will add a whole bunch of timestamps to the video description so you can skip to the part you're looking for if that's what you want to do, or you can follow along with the whole thing. And what we'll do is we'll start with a very, very brief overview of what is an edge node, what's this RFQ process, why do we even need a Price Oracle, and then we'll look at how the Price Oracle example that's in the Taproot Assets repo. We'll look at my fork of that example and what I've done there. We'll go through the file to look at what the program's doing. I'll show you how to build it. We'll look at how to enable it by going into the config and pointing your node to that Price Oracle. And then at the end, we'll do a demo and I'll show you the Price Oracle in action. We can go through and use a nice spreadsheet and validate that we're getting all the numbers we expect to get. So let's get started. First thing we'll do is have a look at a pretty picture. Here's our pretty picture. And this gives us a bit of visualization of an edge node. So we can imagine that I'm an edge node. And in this example, we're going to be working with a stable coin, right? Sort of a mock stable coin on Bitcoin Signet, which we're calling stable SIGs. Right. So I've got this stable coin, right? I'm this edge node. I have a stable coin channel open with Alice, but I also have a regular Bitcoin channel open with Bob, right? And me functioning as the edge node, perhaps Bob generates a regular Lightning invoice for Alice and sends it to her, but Alice decides, hey, I'd like to pay this using this stable coin that I'm holding. In this example, we can imagine a US dollar-based stable coin. So Alice is holding that stable coin. She says, hey there, edge node. I want to send you some stable coins, but I want you to send Bob some Bitcoin, some regular Satoshis on the Lightning Network. Hey, how many of these stable coins do I need to send you to get you to forward this payment on to Bob, right? And that's the question. And that's what our Price Oracle does, is it is a very simple, very basic program, at least the demo Price Oracle we're going to go through today. And it just says, hey, what's the Bitcoin price? And hey, how is this asset being calculated? And then let's crunch some numbers. And okay, Alice, you need to send me X amount of this asset in order to get me to forward this Bitcoin payment on to Bob, right? And so that very simply is what happens. Of course, there's a lot going on behind the scenes, and we call this the RFQ process, right? Request for quote, right? So Alice, requests a quote from me, my edge node using my Price Oracle. I provide it to her. She can accept or reject that quote. All right, cool. So hopefully that gets us all on the same page about what exactly is happening here. And then now we can dive into the specifics and look through the code and all that good stuff. All right, so what we'll be working with today are two different Signet nodes that I have up and running. This first one is my primary node, and it is functioning as an edge node, and it's running a Price Oracle. So we'll spend most of our time here, but later we'll go have a quick look at this node, which is the secondary node, which has a number of different asset channels with that primary node. And we'll use this later when we get to actually demo this happening. But first, let's come over here and have a look at what's happening on this node. So first we'll just run some basic commands to make sure everything is working as expected. So we'll run your standard get info. Awesome. We can see the version that we're running. I should note that currently both these nodes are running this version here of LitD. So we've got two LitD nodes, and we can check that we're, synced to chain and graph. We're on Signet, all that good stuff. Here's where we grab our, pub key and node URIs, which will come in handy. So great, we've got that. Things are going good. Next, I just want to do lit status. So we can double check that the LitD services we want to be running are running. So for our purposes today, we really just care about Taproot Assets, which is running, and LND, which is running. So excellent, we've got that. And last but not least, my personal favorite to see what is happening on the machine is this one here. Oh, I'm gonna do this. There we go, and we can see that everything is running as we expect. Here's LitD, we of course got Bitcoin, and then here's our price oracle, which is already running. And note that this is available to the public there. All right, awesome. So this node is ready. Now let's talk a little bit about the process of setting up a price oracle. All right, so first, I want to come over here and we'll have a quick look at the Taproot Assets repo and note where we are here. Taproot Assets, docs, examples, basic price oracle in this main.go file. So this is our example price oracle that we are working with. However, I have forked it in my own repo here. Note the branch that I'm on, dynamic oracle -0.6. And I have made some changes here. Specifically, I've added the assets that I want to be working with. Oh, also, we should note this, open to the public. I'll dive through this in a bit more detail when we look at it on the machine where it's running. But just noting that I've made a few changes here. And so I have put this in my own repo, and I will link to that in the video description if you want to take a look at it as well. All right, so we have that. Let's have a look at this machine. This is a standard Ubuntu server. I am logged in as the Ubuntu user, and I am in the home directory. So let's have a look at what's going on. All the things we would expect, right? We have Bitcoin running here. We've got LND, we've got LitD. But what I've done is I've taken my fork of the Taproot Assets repo where I've edited that price oracle a little bit, and I have cloned that here, and we'll go have a look at what I've done in that file. Okay, cool. We're gonna go look at this main.go file, and I'll walk you through some of the changes that I made there. Awesome, let's go back up to the top. Okay, awesome. We won't walk through everything in this file because there's a lot of Golang stuff. I just want to give you the big picture of what's happening and direct you to more resources so you can really dig in if you have questions on some of the specifics of what's happening here. But we'll start at the top and go through it. You can see we're doing lots of Golang things, right? We're pulling in lots of different stuff. Here's where I started making some changes. I did this just to make sure that my Oracle is available to the public because that's what I want to do in this case. I could have it just be available to this server, right? Because every node should have, some sort of oracle to talk to, right? So it could have its own personal oracle, if you want to think of it like that it talks to. But in this case, this one is public, so lots of different other nodes can make use of this. All right, now here's something that's really interesting about the latest version of TapD is that, of course, we have to tell our price oracle what assets we want to work with, right? Because, maybe you say, hey, we like this stable coin and that stable coin and this other crazy thing, and we're happy to support those and facilitate the transfer of those assets. But there could be all kinds of assets that we know nothing about or maybe don't want to have anything to do with, right? So we have to decide what assets we want to support, and we have to tell our price oracle what assets we're willing to support. So we can do that with the asset ID, obviously, but the latest version of TapD, what we can also do is support group keys. Now, this is, of course, very important for our use case here that we're working with of stablecoins, right? Because there might be a specific stablecoin. In this case, we're working with the stable SIGs on Signet. But we might have this stable coin where a number of different rounds of this stable coin has been minted. And each time a new round has been minted, we'll have a different asset ID. But of course, all of these things are the same stable coin and they're fungible. And so we want to have a group key to keep all of these things grouped together and fungible. So we can actually add our group key here. And this is the group key that I'm using for our stable SIGs, right? So that is super cool new feature. All right, we'll keep looking through this just a very high level. We have a logger set up, which we'll take a look at, which gives us log files, which is so handy when you're experimenting with this stuff and debugging. Okay, is supported asset, right? We want to have a look at that. Is supported group key, excellent, or we just want to note that that's there. Very important. Okay, cool. Now, this is something I added in. So this is my change, and I just picked, an API out there that'll give me the current price of Bitcoin. Threw this in here. It's pretty simplistic. If you're running an actual production server, you probably want to ping a number of different APIs or have something a little bit more robust. But this works for our example here and just shows you how quick and easy it is to do this. Just, hey, ping this API, sends me back some JSON where I get, the current price of Bitcoin according to this API in US dollar terms. All right, cool. So that's going to be handy for our purposes. All right, here is where we get into the interesting stuff. Now, we're not going to go super in depth with this. I'm going to direct you to some resources, and this file is very, very well commented. What I want to note are two different concepts here, which sometimes can get a bit confused, and I want to note them as separate and talk a little bit about them. So first is this concept of decimal display, right, which is very important, and I think I have a doc prepped and ready here. Excellent. So this is in the Taproot Assets repo, Taproot Assets, docs, RFQ, and decimal display, right? So this is super, super handy to go through this if you have questions, but very briefly, I'll give you the concept here. We can imagine that we are minting a stablecoin. And so at first you might think, okay, we're doing a US dollar stablecoin. So 1 unit of this asset is equal to $1 US. But what if someone wants to send 1 cent of this stablecoin? How do we manage that? So this is the decimal display. So we're minting this at how many decibels, right? So we generally recommend 6, right, for this stablecoin of this fashion. And it's important, we have to, when a stablecoin issuer is issuing, they have to make that decision and decide what level of precision they want so that someone can send a fraction of a penny using their assets if they would like. So that's very important to note. Here in all the examples I'm showing you today, we've gone with 6, right? So you can imagine like $1, so to speak, of this asset isn't 1, it's 1 and then, 6 zeros, right? So that's very important to note what's happening there. It just basically makes those numbers much larger, right? So you kind of have to adjust how you're thinking about that. All right, now that's decimal display. And that's very important to understand. But I think once you get it, you're like, oh, we need cents, we need more precision, right? Okay, no problem. Now, there's another thing that you're going to run into here, which is this scaling factor, right? And what this does here is that, it has to do with, stuff happening deep in the guts of the machine, right? Sort of how Golang is managing these numbers and the type of precision we want to use. Again, this is something we do for the sake of precision. And so this is an additional scaling. So making that number even larger, right, for the sake of precision while we're crunching these numbers. So as you're looking through the guts of the machine and you're seeing these really giant numbers, you might be like, what's happening? You got to keep in mind decimal display and this scaling factor. So I hope that helps. Again, that document really walks through a lot of it. It's very well done, lots of information. And then this, demo is, this file is pretty well commented, so you can see what's happening here. All right, so let's keep going. Another thing that we want to note is this concept of sort of, are we doing like, are we selling or are we buying, right? So there might be sort of 2 different prices that you'd want to add in, whether or not you're taking in assets or sending out assets. You might want to think about how to manage that. In this example here, let me go down and see if I can find it. There we go. So that difference between sort of buy and sell is in the demo price circle. I've sort of taken that out or taken that difference out of my own, which I've done just for simplicity's sake for my own testing, right? But here's where I've changed that, for what you're doing, you may very well want to add that back in. So just something to note For simplicity here, I just want to double check that everything's working. I don't want to have to think about which direction this is going in, so I've taken that out for simplicity. All right, let's see if there's anything else we should note in this file. Those are the really interesting things. There we go. This is where some of the action actually happens down here. Do self-signed search. There we go. All right. Cool. And that's where it all happens. So you can go dig through this in depth if you like, but hopefully this gives you a good idea of what's happening here, right? So our price oracle is, taking in, okay, what's the price of Bitcoin? What assets are we supporting? What's their decimal display? Then we're adding this scaling factor to crunch the numbers really well. And then we're doing some math in TapD, right? Some math, using some math functions that are in the Taproot Assets repo to crunch all these numbers and then return something via gRPC to another node that requested that quote. Say, hey, here's the quote for you. Here's a number. Awesome. So let's close out of this. All right, so now we have a good idea of what's happening in that price oracle. How do we build this to make use of it? All right, so if we come here, Taproot Assets, Docs, Examples, we can see there is a make file. So we would just run make here. Now I've already done this on this machine, so I don't need to do that. Only takes a second. And then we would come here, and here is where you would find that binary, and then you would move it to wherever you would put Go binaries on your machine. So for me, that would be something like this, right? And I would move it there. Now, what's really cool, so let's go there and have a look. So we can see we got all the usual things we'd expect, lots of different experimentation I was doing, but here is our price oracle binary, and check this out. This is a log file, which is super duper handy. Let's go have a quick look. So we'll have a quick look at this, and we can see all kinds of super duper helpful information. Subject asset is supported via group key, right? And then we can have a look at what that group key was, what this API that we're pinging thinks that the current price of Bitcoin is. Note this is scaled here, right? Again, we talked about that scaling factor, but we can be like, okay, this is what our API thinks that the current price of Bitcoin is, right? And so we can just have a look at that so we can double check that all our numbers make sense. So super handy. All right, one more thing we'll note quickly. I love to set everything up via systemd. If you're the same, I'll very quickly show you the systemd file that I'm using that's working for me. Okay, there we have it. You can see nothing terribly exciting. Maybe this would be a little bit unusual, but pretty simple. This is what is working just fine on my machine. So hopefully that's helpful for you as well. Okay, so now we understand what's happening in the price oracle. We understand how to build it. We understand how to run it on a machine. Now we have to look at how do we let our litd node know that it should go use this price oracle. And the answer is, of course, with one line of config. So pretty simple. So let's just look here. We're going to go in here and have a look at our config file. There it is. All right, excellent. I won't bore you with everything else that's in this file because we've already covered that in other videos. We're just going to look at this one line down here, this one right here. So Taproot asset or taproot-assets.experimental.rfq.price oracle address equals RFQ RPC, and then where we can find this particular price oracle. In this case, because I'm running it on the same machine, we can just do this localhost. That's fine, and we need to note the port. When we go and look at the configuration on the other node, you'll see that I have the IP address to this price oracle node in that config. So let's go have a look at that. Cool. So here is our secondary node, and this node is going to be using the same price oracle. Right, it's going to be using that price oracle on our edge node. So we will go look at what's in this config file. Cool. And again, we just need this one line of config right at the bottom here. You can see this is entirely identical, except here is the instead of the local host IP address, it's the IP address for our edge node. So very simple. Don't forget to restart your litd service when you make config changes so that that will take hold and actually work. Okay, so I think now we are ready to actually show you this in action, which is super fun. First, let's just double check that we went and checked everything on our edge node to make sure that that was all running correctly. Now let's just have a quick look here and make sure everything is running correctly here. So I just did lit CLI status. We can see that Taproot Assets is running and LND is running. That's what we care about here. So, okay, cool. We should be good to go on this node. We can also run this command, and because I love it, and just have a look at how it differs from the other machine. And we can see again, we have CoinD running, we have litd running. We do not have a price oracle running on this machine because it's on the other machine, and that's fine because we're going to go talk to it via gRPC. Awesome. So let us clear all this up, and now we're going to start the demo. All right, so one thing that I'll note that I like to do before I get started with a transaction, especially when we're testing all these numbers and making sure everything is going well, is I just like to run this command, ln-cli list channels, and then for a specific peer, right? So this is, so I'm on my edge node. This is the pub key for the secondary node. So it's going to show me all of the channels that I have with that particular node. And then I can just like do stuff like come into this little notes doc and note the asset and sats balance of every channel that I have. So when I send through this transaction, I can know exactly how many sats and how many assets got transferred, right? So helpful for me when I'm just double checking things and working through it. And it'll be great for this demo because I can prove to you that everything is working as we expect it to. All right. Also, what we're going to do, which is fun, is we're going to have a look at this, which is our RFQ rate calculator. This is a spreadsheet that I made, but it's public, links in the description. And you can go and run these experiments and then put your numbers in here and see if you got the exact amount of assets and sats that you were expecting in that transaction. So helpful because none of this math is particularly challenging. It's not rocket science. It's just tedious. And so it's really helpful to have a spreadsheet like this so you don't have to do it every single time. All right, so what we're going to do is come back over here to our nodes. And we're going to go to our secondary node. And on this secondary node, we're going to generate an asset invoice. And then we're going to pay it using our edge node. We could do much more sophisticated examples. We could have one node on one part of the network and then another node on the other part of the network, and we could do a lot more hops. But this simplistic example, I think, will successfully prove that our price oracle is working as expected. So we're going to keep it simple, and we're going to start with some invoice creation. So I will copy and paste this command in here and walk through what's happening. All right, so we have lit CLI. We're noting that we're on Signet. We're using this ln add invoice. We can add a helpful memo if we would like. And here's a really, really cool part. We said, hey, litd, we want to create an invoice, a Lightning invoice, but we want this to be for assets, right? Because we want to receive assets, but we want some stable SIGs, right? But we don't really care which batch of stable SIGs we get, right? As long as they're stable SIGs, we don't really care. So we don't have to note a specific asset ID. We can note group key, and we can add to our invoice, which is super cool, very helpful. We obviously have to have asset amount. I am going to copy this and add this to my little note doc here so I can note exactly how many we were requesting. so we can see what happens in the end here. Cool. All right, and then we need to note this RFQ pub key. It says, hey, I'm doing this whole RFQ process, and this is the node I'm interacting with. So this here is the pub key for my edge node. All right, great. We got all that. Let's run this command and see what happens. Awesome. Just as we would like, we get this invoice right here. This is an invoice specifically for stable SIGs, right? But it can be routed on the Lightning Network. All right, so I'm just going to paste that invoice in here. We are going to come back over to this edge node, and we are going to pay that invoice, hopefully using some assets. Okay, great. Let's have a look at this command. Again, let's CLI. We're on Signet. We've got to tell it some info here. We're using ln pay invoice. Here is our big long invoice. And again, what we're telling let D is we're going, hey, we want to pay this invoice. It's for some assets. We're going to pay it with some assets. We want to pay it with stable SIGs, but we don't care which particular tranche or round of stable SIGs. We just want to pay it with stable SIGs. So use anything from this group key. And there's a number of different channels. So, you know, TapD is going to do the work of selecting what it wants to do there. And then we have this RFQ setting here where we just again say, hey, we're interacting with this other node. This is the pub key for that other node. So, cool. Let's give this payment a try and see what happens. Awesome. That payment worked. So let's go have a look at exactly what happened behind the scenes to make sure all our numbers are exactly what we are expecting. So first, let's note the number of Satoshis. So basically, TapD went and crunched this and said, hey, I think that payment is worth this many Satoshis. So we're going to note that here. Oops, like that. There we go. Cool. Now we can go look at our channel balances and see exactly how many assets were sent. So let's have a look here. Let's find out what channel this came out of and exactly how many assets were sent. All right, this one. Definitely this one. Awesome. So let's take this amount. Came out of channel 2. This was the previous balance of channel 2 for assets, or sorry, channel 3. Awesome. So this is how many assets were actually sent. Okay, cool. Well, that's pretty spot on. Now, what I want to do is come back over here to this edge node and go have a look at the logs from our price oracle so we can find out exactly what our price oracle thought the price of Bitcoin was in US dollar terms while we were making this transaction. Scroll all the way down. Excellent. This is exactly what our price oracle thought the price of Bitcoin was while we were making this transaction. So we can also note that here. So we have all of the data. Okay, now let's go look at our spreadsheet and see if everything worked as expected. First thing I'm going to do is paste in that price of Bitcoin. Sweet. Now, again, we need to note decimal display. 6 is what we're working with here, so that's good. That works. All right, now let's take, oh, okay, I already have this here, right? This is exactly how many asset units we received. So that should have been worth 9328 sats. What does this say? 9328. Excellent. So we are spot on. Our price oracle is working exactly as expected. So that is great news. Okay, so let's just recap because we did a lot in this video. Again, timestamps in the description so you can go back and see whatever portion of this video is useful to you. But we talked very briefly about what is an edge node, what's the RFQ process, why do we even need a price oracle? Then we went and looked at the price oracle that's in the demo price oracle that's in the Taproot Assets repo. We went and looked through in detail the fork of it that I'm using where I just added in some asset IDs, some group keys, a very simplistic API call to get the current price of Bitcoin. And we had a look at the various different options you can do in there. We discussed the difference between decimal display and a scaling factor, which is used in the price oracle. Remember that decimal display is just so, a user of a stablecoin can send cents, right? Rather than just whole dollars if we're talking about a US dollar stablecoin. All right, then we went and had a look at how to build that, a quick look at a system D file, and we went and had a look at the config that we would need to use to connect a litd node to a price oracle. And then last but not least, we went and actually did a transaction and verified that indeed our price oracle is working as expected. Again, as always, docs.lightning.engineering is a great place to go for all these resources, and everything that I talked about today links in the description. So thank you.